Hold on. Yeah, we're good to go. Sorry. Second here. See. Okay, let's give me 1 second. Wrong agenda. Give me 1 second here. Let's. Oh. Okay. Sorry. There we go. Are you back on? I grab. Your conditioner. Are you back on live? We're still on. All right. Thank you. We'd like to say good afternoon and welcome all our audience and people watching us virtually. Welcome to our June meeting before we head out into a summer break, and we'll be back in August. So we'd like to call this meeting to order, and I will ask Trustee Liz Sarah to lead us in prayer.
Sure. We'll do the peace prayer, also known as St. Francis of Assisi. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, and to be loved as to love. For it is in dying, for it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. And God, we ask that you guide our board meeting today. And as our school year draws to an end, we thank you for the many blessings we've had. And we ask that we have a restful and peaceful summer, always staying close to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
I'll ask Trustee Tabo to lead us in our land acknowledgement.
We are a party to Treaty 6, and as such, we wish to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is Treaty 6 territory and a traditional meeting ground for many Indigenous peoples. We recognize the diversity of First Nations who have at one time lived across the territory, as well as the presence of the Métis Nation.
Thank you. 1.4, public forum. I have nothing with me. Mr. Bouchard, did we get any request? Thank you. We'll go 1.5, approval of our agenda. Are there any additions?
I'd like to request that we add item 7.5 to create an ad hoc committee for the board self-evaluation.
Thank you. 7.5. Ad hoc committee. Any other additions? Thank you. And I have a motion to accept the agenda as amended. Yeah.
I move that we accept the agenda as changed. That's true today.
Amended. Thank you. All in favor, show my hand, please. Carried. Thank you. That is the minutes from May 18th. Any corrections or omissions? I see none. Can I ask for motion to accept past minutes? Go ahead. Trustee.
I move that the board accept the minutes of the regular meeting held May 18, 2022 as circulated.
Thank you. Any discussion? comments? I see none. Joanne, all in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. So you have the board priorities attached to these minutes, as we've always done, for your review as you go into the discussions. So executive and administrative reports, item number 4. Attached is the board chair's reports. Any comments? .2 superintendent reports. Any comments or questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Chair, report on effective relationship. I just wanted to comment that the staff recognition celebration I thought was excellent. Thank everyone who was a part of doing that, an excellent attendance. Yeah, another question I have is, you said you met with a parent. My question is, does this happen often, or is it just a one-off kind of situation?
Which bullet are you speaking to?
Number 12. No,
Highlighted, yeah,
you highlighted it, met with a parent.
building effective relationship.
It's actually in Lori's department, so
So it was Lori.
anything italicized is done by either a director or an assistant superintendent.
I think that's,
It can be either assistant superintendent, sorry, my apologies.
yeah. So your question specifically, Donna, does it have
Quite often, or is it just like a one?
one-offs? I mean, occasionally parents call and ask policies and procedures for certain things. And so sometimes they're wanting to ask us before they even become part of STAR, is what is STAR's philosophy on this, and what are their policies for students with various diagnoses. And as school ops, we are both school ops for different schools. Questions directly related to a certain school would go to a certain assistant.
So like I said, this is in request to accommodations and things to help that student settle and not come in smoothly. Thank you. Any, go ahead.
Under section 3, modeling commitment to professional learning, bullet number 4, in regards to French immersion recruitment process. What was the outcome of that, and what is STAR currently experiencing for French immersion teachers for recruitments?
So I'll turn that over to Assistant Superintendent White.
So certainly this was a pan-Canadian study out of Ontario. I was able to be part of the information in the fall and then the summary recommendations. So the study came out with recommendations for boards similar to STAR, who have French immersion programming throughout, and made recommendations, simple ones such as websites and looking at your website to ensure that you are attracting French immersion candidates, because candidates who are interested would like to know how well versed and how integrated French immersion is to the specific school sites. And so information was given that way. Also, a clear indication from the study is that it is challenging to recruit French immersion teachers, and it is a national scale of recruitment. And a request was for everyone to consider focusing nationally if you are recruiting across Canada to bring people to your area. So that was two of the key factors.
What is the current state of our challenge to find teachers?
Well, right now we've done well for the year that we're in, as certainly the district grows and French immersion grows. The challenge will be to continue to supplement that. We work really hard to start our French immersion recruitment early on in the school year for the following year to be able to meet the needs, the ever-changing needs of French immersion teachers.
Thank you.
My question is about number 6, and it's just about the Indigenous education coach. I'm just wondering, will that coach be coming into each of the schools, or will they be spending more time in the schools that have a larger population?
Right.
How's that?
So that position is meant to support the outcomes, both in the education plan and in the board priorities, but the Indigenous education coach will work in all schools because we have students in all schools.
Mhm.
So the person is there to support administration and staff primarily in their work. So will be working with students, not as often. It's mostly as a support for the adults in the division and building relationship with the communities and the parents of students, promoting those outcomes. Lori, anything you want to add?
Oh, we had a discussion about that and we felt that it was, like our committee had a discussion about it, sorry, that's who we is. And essentially, we talked about this person needs to serve the entire division and needs to be supporting the outcomes or the board priorities and ensuring that everybody receives equitable service. I won't say equal service, but equitable.
Sounds like quite a job this person has.
But it's exciting because part of our work, we talked about what is our vision for the, far in the future for Indigenous education in our division. And so this person would support working towards that vision. Okay, thank you.
Right.
Leading in, I have a few more questions, but leading off of the last question that was just asked by Trustee Tugwood in number 6, bullet 6, in regards to, let's add it here, supporting schools with Indigenous graduation ceremonies. Can you tell me more about that? And is that option during a graduation ceremony available to only the Indigenous students within our district or for all students?
I'll just maybe start off, but it is, and Lori, you can supplement for sure. But one of the things that we often do with our First Nation students, they'll be presented with an eagle feather. That's a tradition and custom in their culture, but we wouldn't do that with non-Indigenous students. It wouldn't be fitting, and it might be seen as offensive, quite honestly. So I think that's probably one of the things. Is there anything else, Lori, that you're aware of?
Yeah, and also a Métis sash. So if they're Métis, then they receive sash as well. And Ramona Washburn was the one who will be our Indigenous education coach, but she currently works at Sacred Heart and St. Augustine. So she was the one who presented them to the students, and she gave a little bit of history and just about each of the items and what that means to their culture before presenting them.
I would also add that in Drayton Valley, we had elders on stage welcoming the graduates and presenting the students who took the Aboriginal Studies courses with mementos of that celebration as well. So.
That happened at Christ the King, which is why I was interested to see this on the list. I didn't see that.
Yeah, one more question. Yeah, go ahead.
That'll be my last one. This is bullet 8, number 8, and I'm just curious if I think it's bullet number 5. They got attended the Education School Commission's board meeting. So I'm just wondering, is this going to be a regular, or is that just happening? I'm not sure.
That was the meeting yesterday.
Oh, you're talking about the meeting yesterday. Okay. It said board meeting. I thought maybe it was the regular board meeting. Okay, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
My last item encompasses numerous bullets. So in section 3, bullet 7, bullet 9, section 4, bullet 11, it all talks about curriculum implementation, the training that's currently going on with the new curriculum, and this gives a good update. But further to that, is there anything more that you could tell us about that? Where are we at for implementation and training of the teachers for the upcoming year?
I'll maybe speak a little bit about just some general principles. That the idea that Director Smith is taking is that each group or grade level will kind of have their needs met a little bit as they dictated, like what their specific needs are. But each grade is met twice already, and they're done for the year. And then in the fall, they'll move into a cohort model, and I'll get Assistant Superintendent Cardinal to speak a little bit about what that looks like.
So actually, we just talked about that this morning, and because we need to ensure that we've got concrete plans moving forward. So for K-3, they will be meeting at minimum of 2 times next year. But part of their, the idea for implementation is that they will be creating resources that align with the curriculum, and they're co-created. They will dictate what that looks like, so what portions of the curriculum they would like to take, but they would, basically it's almost like a divide and conquer kind of idea. And it's a way to go out, try what you're doing, and come back and give feedback and kind of have that feedback loop back to the group. And so that's for K-3. 4 to 6, we will begin in the spring again as well. And so we're just going to move forward in that manner.
Just to add to that, so yeah, the new curriculums have not been released. They've told us spring, which is again late. You know, that was one of our feedback to the province this year, is that, you know, releasing the curriculum in April is pretty late if you want us to train staff for the upcoming year. The other thing that is late is the funding. So we had to submit the amount of teachers that needed to be trained in new curriculum, and we did that, looking at my calendar here, almost a month ago. We still have not received from the government details of the funding in 2 envelopes, one for resources, second for training. So that's a little bit hard for us to kind of plan and understand how to use those monies when we still don't know how much we're going to receive. So that is concerning as well.
Okay. So from what I'm hearing is resource and training isn't available yet. They haven't released the curriculum, and then financial support.
Well, the financial support, we had to submit our numbers to the province, then they would release the money, but that's been a long, we're still waiting. It's the end of June.
Okay.
You know, and the curriculum for grade 4, 5, and 6, which will come into effect September of 23, they're telling us that they won't complete that until next spring. We're going to be in the same boat next year. It's too late.
So folks, those are the advocacy messages that we will take up. Sorry. Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
One last question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So under section 7, bullet 2, in regards to Father Lacombe, minor changes were accepted. Where are we for timeline on that?
So, well, Ed was at a site meeting yesterday, but the last that's been communicated to me is Halloween. Is there any change to that?
There's been no change for that. On a couple of notes, I know we had mentioned at the last meeting, we're waiting for confirmation of an air handling unit to be constructed to make sure that that didn't cause any further delays. Actually, that handling unit arrived on site last week or a couple of weeks ago. I actually took a picture of it, seeing as it caused so much grief. The other item that has been of concern in terms of delivery and supply has been the wood floor for the gymnasium. And in that case, the supplier, the actual manufacturer, has had to be changed because for economic reasons. So they're just confirming, they know they've got a supply material that's still expected for the end of August. What they're doing is confirming that there's no change in price, which is an issue for Alberta Infrastructure, not for our board. Certain number of stories of vendors experiencing price increases. But there's been no change in our timelines at this point to October 31st, but there's been considerable discussion that the contractor update their schedule because a number of items have actually been completed ahead of time. And then the number of items have been delayed. So trying to judge where it's at from Alberta, both from our standpoint and Alberta Infrastructure, we want to get a firmer idea of where things are at and what's maybe being delayed by supply chain and what is ahead of schedule because work can still proceed in other areas and go through. So, and I do have more photographs and of the way the school currently looks. Painting is all started in that school. So I've got some of the color scheme pictures, and hopefully I can put something together again for trustees and circulate that.
Right, yeah, but
I just have one question. It's in section 5, leading and learning. It's the last bullet point regarding the mental health literacy team reviewing the elementary mental health resources. So I'm just the Alberta-wide research project. So I know that there is a shortage in support personnel with Alberta Health. So is that what the research project is to see where, I'm looking at you because it's italicized, so. Is that what this research project is to see where the gaps are, or can you speak to that?
So the mental health literacy is a program that is created by the province. And so it was basically for junior high school. They're now piloting the elementary mental health literacy. And so when we implemented the mental health literacy for Division 2 and 3, 3 and 4, they asked if we would like to pilot for Division 1 and 2. And we had said yes a long time ago before the pandemic. They're finally coming out with the pilot, and then we've asked schools if they would like to pilot, and they're currently answering and letting us know whether or not they would like to pilot in the coming year. So that's what that's about. So it's essentially like basically creating awareness around mental health issues and what I handle and these kinds of things. It's more it's not preventative like the third path. It's more of, okay, if we see signs, what can we do?
Gotcha. Perfect. Thank you.
I would just add to that. You made a good point there, Lori. The division does have a two-pronged approach: preventative, which is the third path, and mental health literacy is when we do see students that present with mental health challenges. That's how we respond. That's how.
thank you all. We will move to 4.3, Secretary Treasurer's report. Okay, we have one question. Go ahead.
This is on financial and risk management. The activities related to the budget, including submission to the minister and request for use of reserves. So I wondered if that request was received and if it was in the timely manner.
The request was sent, so it has been received by the ministry. We haven't had a reply from the ministry. I received an update as part of a conference I was attending last week, that provincially, all the board budgets have been accumulated. We have not received any follow-up questions, other boards have, but they were indicating that, ministry staff are indicating that bundle request for use of reserve is going to the minister next Monday. So at that point, once there's no further questions of the minister, hopefully we'll receive word notification of approval fairly shortly after that. But I don't know what that process of review, there's no indication of timelines beyond the 27th, when we would hear a response back by. And I'm pretty confident that department staff wouldn't commit the minister to a timeline without having been told what it would look like.
I know that's one of the issues with the SBA is we're looking at the timelines of getting those approvals. Thank you.
But the impact will be on contracts and things throughout this summer, right? Before September. So if there are projects that are part of these submissions, quicker than
Quick as possible.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, trustee.
For transportation management, it refers to meetings with 4 contractors for transportation, and that all 4 contracts are expiring August 31st. So what does that, I guess, process look like? I know that's a little bit operational, but as administration, you renew those contracts?
Yeah, we go through a process of working with our contractors in terms of extension, if possible. Typically, that's what our process has been in the past, unless we have a significant issue with the contractor, or in some cases, the contractor may be withdrawing services. That might be for reasons with smaller operations, they might simply be retiring. So the contract might be terminated. So we do have one contract that expires at the end of this current school year, August 31st of 22. So we're in discussion about many things that are happening in their world, including insurance, cost of fuel, as well as replacement cost of buses. And in conjunction with the additional funding that the province announced for next year in transportation with a 4.6% increase. We have two contracts that we had signed with an indication that we would look at the rates, expecting that two things might occur over the terms of those contracts. One being that the province finally maybe revise what the funding rates are, or there may be implications if the Transportation Task Force report and how the ministry is responding to that task force may impact our operations and our funding implications there. So we left two contracts open to that provision of those two eventualities, and one has occurred. We've got increased funding, so we'll be talking with the contractors there. Again, I'm expecting a conversation a bit about their realities currently. And then the third one, I've mentioned it because we did have a discussion moving forward into that next year. It will end, but of course they're already wanting to talk about the cost of fuel and how that's impacting. And so trying to see whether our additional funding, because their contract has been fixed, can help assist with the cost of fuel moving forward. So those are the types of topics, and that's sort of the process that's going through.
All right. Oh, Mr. Shedd.
Just further to that, the minister did have a press conference this morning. I don't know if you've heard, but they did reinstate us the surcharge over $1.25 for diesel. So there is some relief there as well for patients and contractors.
So that was the update on the modular situation for Sacred Heart.
As far as I know, we're all proceeding. Contracts have been signed with regards to the construction of the link and the installation. Our infrastructure has approved the budget there, as I've indicated, it's over $400,000, and that excludes the cost of the actual modular itself. And that's just the installation, the setup, and the hookup to utilities. We're using a plan on Sacred Heart when there was a modernization, I believe it was back in 1993. There was provisions for and infrastructure in place for modulars to be added onto that school. And so we're utilizing that plan and that structural items that were put in place, and maybe eliminate one of their storage rooms. That storage room is actually intended to be a hallway out to another set of 4 corridors at time. So we're underway in that regard, and my last update from facilities indicated that we should still be on schedule. The only thing that would be, questionable, which is an item out of our control, is the delivery date of that modular.
All right. Thank you. There are no further questions. We'll go to number 5, business items. I have Mr. Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So annually, we meet with our field services manager to review the annual educational results report and the education plan. We met on January 28th. You have in your package the letter that came May 27th, basically confirming that the division is in compliance with all the legislative requirements of those documents. So that letter is always included when we receive it in the next agenda. For your information.
Okay. Questions, comments? All right. We will look at our work plan 5.2. Yeah, go ahead, Trustee Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe I should have brought this up earlier, but it just occurred to me, should we move 5.2 as a discussion item after we discuss 7.5, the addition of the ad hoc committee.
The annual work plan.
Yes, because what we discuss or may decide out of 7.5 might affect some items within the work plan. And I guess as a question for process, is this work plan for information, or are we approving the work plan for the upcoming year?
Work plan is for information as we organize things and move things. This is just for planning purposes. So I believe, Mr. Bouchard, correct me if I'm wrong, over the years we've moved things as we are streamlining some of the events and submissions and reporting.
Okay.
So I can just say we can leave it as is, and whatever happens there, we will treat it in the fall to align with the work we're doing. Okay, yes. All right, is that okay? We have something to say or no? So we shall.
I guess I would add, it is a fluid document. It's in your work plan to review and approve it in June, but that doesn't mean it's set in stone. There's no motion to it, so. It's more information.
Okay. So any further comments on the work plan? All right, we will then move to our third quarter financial report. See if we have money for the summer. So we shall go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Lecker, please.
All right. Again, the financial report, the quarterlies, we tried to modify from historical reports to reflect two things. One is the audited financial statements. The other is to reflect the education plan. I've had some recommended edits to improve the report from the superintendent. They're not in this version. They're some terminology and some titling. We will correct moving forward. It's a bit of a fluid as we evolve, a number of things to where the budget reflects what the division is doing rather than driving what the division is doing. So we're trying to align the decisions that are being made, the strategies that are being implemented along with that financial report. So moving into the report itself, again, I've told you this before, it's easier if you get to follow along with Ed, with what he's looking at rather than following along on your own. But nonetheless, so the first area in terms of priorities for the board is Faith Life. We'll be removing the word development from that title for future iterations. And what we've done on these charts is split out what may be centrally administered or directed through the division and what is at the school level. So under the budget, you'll see in all of these, you'll see the school versus a central office and the full component or the full value of what the division is planning to spend or is actually spent in that area. So in this area, you'll notice that the expenditure side seems rather light on the Faith Life. With regards to the central office expenditures, part of that is our central office staffing. So the year to date on our central office staffing carries through to July and August. So the full value of those expenditures are not over the 10 months, but over 12 months. So I expect the central office expenditures to align with our budgeting. At the school level, and this will be a theme through this report, what we're seeing, the school level expenditures appear to be light. And whether there are two things that I've given consideration with regards to school-based expenditures this year. One is that a lot of the faith-based expenditures at the school level are related to student field trips or retreats, and up until March, that was fairly restricted or limited. Now that it's opened up, that makes those activities much easier. But it's also very typical that those activities are undertaken at this time of the year. There's a lot of field trips that go on in June. It reflects in other areas of our financial statements. So this one, we may not get a full sense of where those expenditures are at until the school year is actually completed. So that will be reflected in the fourth quarter financial report. We do want to give you kind of an idea of where we're at with our expenditures in this area, and the value budgeted for is where actual expenditures are. In terms of professional development, priority B of the board. We saw. Now, the difference between the two charts look huge. Bear in mind that the total amount that we've budgeted for that appears in our budgets is only about $160,000, essentially at the school level. And the majority of that central portion is the professional development fund for certificated staffs. What we're finding is that area, we're still working out our costs because it is appearing to be significantly underspent. There's typically about $75,000 established each year for staff to access. Opportunities have been limited, but we've also had a low kind of uptake. So we're trying to, we've identified that some of the substitute costs that are associated with that PD development may not be fully attributed to that area. So we're doing a little bit of work around that, but we're still seeing that it's underspent as opposed to our school level, where they have budgeted and they're spending more than they had budgeted for. So this is one area where I think we're meeting most of the needs that we've established, and we've established budgets for in that area. Moving on to priority C, supporting students in their journey. There's a couple of components here. The first one being First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. Again, we'll be removing the word development out of that title for future reference. The budget, when you look at central office as opposed to the schools, central office looks like it's gone way over budget. Part of that being is just our cost at, we've attributed some costs that are at the school level to central office, and we haven't changed them over. So I think what you'll see is the expenses on year to date, school level will go up, the central office will come into line with what we budgeted for. Again, whether we're going to see the full value of school-based expenditures, we have to kind of wait until June comes out. If there are things like field trips or some immersive activities at the school level that happen at this time of year. Also within this area, we looked at specialized learning supports. And again, we've got the budget versus school-based. Centralized office, again, most of that is related to staffing costs, which will also be paid over the month of July and August because of the way we've set salaries and payments. So our year-to-date for central office should come into line. Our school-based expenditures are relatively in line with what we've budgeted for. I have no concerns here with regards to that, to the expenditures there. So that's where I end with the focus and the kind of the subset of areas that address the board priorities. And the majority of our business is regular education, so to speak. These other areas are what we also do as we incorporate that. So the balance of it is intended to look more like our audited financial statements. So on page 5, where we have the statement of operations. This one is strictly where our year-to-date is and what we had budgeted for. The narrative indicates where we've got high variances. What we would expect is for our revenues would be somewhere around 75%. 8 out of 12 months we're through the year. Some of our revenues are over 10 months, but the big one over to education is over 12. So we should be somewhere in that 75% range. With regards to sales and investments, income, the percentage on investment income I'll speak to first. At 366% looks huge. And I readily admit that. But when you look at the base of $10,000 and our actual currently at $36,000, the value of it is not as large as the percentage would indicate. So it's not a large value difference. Sales of and services is looking at 171% over our budget. There is notations at the bottom of the report indicating that we had under budgeted for the areas of kinder care and before and after school care revenues, as well as that canteen and school concession revenues. And I think part of that is just the conservatism of our schools, not knowing what this year might look like and what the access to those services will be. And, you know, with the knowledge of what 2021 looked like coming in and out of COVID. So I think there's a lot more conservative on our revenues from the school. The other one, which is a little bit low in terms of fees. I'm going to draw your attention to that one. Just below the property taxes line, it's only sitting at 64%. The question there is, are we not, you know, collecting the fees that are being charged? We have a large number of outstanding fees. That budgeted revenue figure not only includes school fees kind of charged for the year, but also includes fees for curriculum activities. Again, as I had talked about before, curriculum activities, we usually do a lot of field trips in the month of June. So as we finish off the month of June, I'm expecting that revenue figure to come more in line with budget. Because we're just preceding that period, we're not as high as we are compared to our budgeted amount. On the expenditure side, again, we're looking at, for the most part, somewhere between 75 or 80%, depending on the area. One of the highlights there to indicate is instruction on the pre-K looks extremely low. Again, as we align our costing, it's an ongoing challenge to make sure that we've got staffing that are associated with the pre-K actually being charged to that area rather than regular instruction. So as we move through the year, start moving those dollars, so the instruction amount will go down, the pre-K amount will more closely align to our budgets, if not exceeded, because our pre-K budget is based on a certain number of students, and I believe we had more students than we budgeted for the pre-K area. So do not be surprised if it's actually higher than our budget. That's because the number of students that the budget was based on was with regards to plant operations and maintenance, again, a little bit lower with regards to expenditures. Financial services indicated to me that they were missing 1 quarter of the amortization for school buildings and equipment, which is a significant figure. They missed one of the quarter. They didn't get the quarter posted into the report. I've made inquiries and assurances that will not affect the financial statements. Of course, in fact, impacts your interpretation of the report. So, but again, trying to get the information out as quickly as possible. It's something that they missed in their reporting. Will correct that in the future. Transportation system administration. Transportation's at 80%. Again, this is my expectation. Most of our expenditures are related to contracts with for busing, and those will finalize at the end of June. So we should be somewhere about 8 out of 10 months of the operational year with our expenditures. So that's in alignment. System administration, we're at 80%. Might be a little higher than the 75% that I would anticipate. But we also operate 2 months without board meetings and kind of normal operations, although our staffing costs flow through. So I'm not anticipating any concerns with that budget at this point in time. As we finalize. And the last one being external services, we're at 84%. External services are related to those before and after school care programs, our kinder care, child care programs, as well as our canteens. And so that revenue, those expenditures generally fluctuate with the revenues being received. And again, we're at 80% of the year. They seem to be a little higher, but as they move through the month of June, if there's any kind of supplies, they will let that inventory roll out and we'll be buying new. Same with the kinder care programs, those will start to wind up as we flow through to the end of the year. So I don't have any concerns. Moving through the rest of the report. Again, this is essentially the same information as on the previous at the bottom. This is where we stand here to date. But in the same format that you will see a schedule like this presented in the audited financial statements. It gives you a little bit more detail in terms of where the expenditures are similar to the financial statements and the budget for each one of those areas, whether the expenditures are primarily in the staffing side, or is it primarily on supplies and services or other areas. For facilities, you can see that on the amortization lines, so line 24 and 25, amortization is almost $2 million on the year to date. So it would have been another $1 million there of expenditures just on amortization or depreciation. So that will skew when those numbers are not matched to the time period. With regard to schools' decentralized budget, and this is where I said we've got a theme where our schools seem to be underspending. And this has raised some concerns for myself and the superintendent. We'll wait and see, but we'll maybe enter into discussions about how we get better information. My concern is if this was a trend, because schools are concerned about the resources they'll have in the following year. Starting next year, if we roll this up, this may affect the board's cap in terms of operating reserves, because the operating, that cap is based on what is undesignated reserves, and then what is designated operating reserves at the school level, excluding school generated funds. So this is that budget area. This is strictly the school budgets, not including school generated funds. So there's some, I've got my concerns as we watch this to make sure we don't have, but I would call it behavior that schools are underspending because they're worried about the resources next year, but that puts the board and the division at a disadvantage, because now we have lacked the ability to redirect resources, or we have to send resources back to the province because we've exceeded the cap. The province has been very clear that if we exceed our cap, it will be returned. And then the last page of the report, one of the last pages, it's kind of twofold. I'll go to the very last page first. So this is similar to our year to date, but I asked financial services to do an extrapolation of where we might end at the end of this fiscal year. And so there's an projection to year end. Their projection, our projection right now is that we'll have a deficit of expenditure on revenues, about $1.3 million. When we submitted our budget in the spring, we were projecting to have about $1.2 million. So on a projection, $100,000 on a $50 million budget, I don't have a great deal of concerns. I'm happy to see that we're relatively in line with that. And so the chart before, which is where I'm kind of looking, is what's happening to our unrestricted surplus based on that $1.3 million. And so everything else being equal, there would be $1.7 million left in our unrestricted reserves. Our operating reserves would sit somewhere at about $1.1 million. Now, if our schools are underspending, that school operating reserve will be considerably higher, and our surplus from unrestricted surplus might appear lower. I'm still, there is one thing, and it's a timing issue with regards to our financial statements, and that is the funding that we've received to mitigate our enrollment decline. And that creates resources that the division has available. But because of the way the province is requiring us to report, they won't be realized except over time as it clears itself out, so to speak, from our surpluses and reserves and expenditures. But from my perspective, we're in good stead. We're on our path that we had established with our budget for this year. And we've got resources available to fund the reserve projects that were approved back in April. That's what I have for my report. Everybody's still awake. Questions?
question about
Go ahead.
the schools underspending. Will that change a huge amount because of grads and everything that's happening in June? I mean, there's a lot more expenses that happen in June, and this doesn't include June.
There's a couple of things that might impact it. One is those kind of events. But a lot of times those events they charge a fee and start covering some of the costs. There might also be just a purchasing pattern and the school's budget, not only the fees, they might be saying, oh, we'll charge a bunch of things for next year to this year's budget. So we land up with some issue because that's not correct in terms of our accounting practices and what we have to follow in terms of reporting financial information. So I think there'll be a number of things that we'll have to start making sure that principals are aware and get comfortable with. In a past life, I've had a discussion with a couple of principals, not here, in a different division, about that concern, about restricting your spending because you're uncertain of the future. And I'm going, if you spend this money you have on the now, that you have on the students you have now, and put the onus back on either senior administration or on the board of trustees, I said the board of trustees has a much stronger advocacy position for additional resources than if we continually show that we have surplus funds or unspent funds because of that concern that you're not going to have enough resources. Because now we've got the schools building a contingency. In central office, we allow for contingencies for staffing and adjusting for class sizes or the number of students in the class. It all builds up, and if it's not spent, then we have to try and see if we can get it spent and put it into place. But sometimes the timing doesn't work. We've seen that on numerous occasions from the province, when they give us, an additional $200,000 or $300,000 in April and say spend it by the end of August. It's a little hard to feel that we're effective in utilizing those funds at that time of year. So I think more and more we'll be talking with administrators to spend the money they have and the students they have now. Really judging why they are not spending money. What are they saving for, or what are they withholding expenditures for?
Go ahead, trustee.
And if you could just go up one page to the same thing, where the schools are not spending, so the very first one, Mother Do Well.
Yeah.
So they really underspend. So the funds that they could have had but didn't take advantage of, would that be EAs, or was that sewing material, or?
Well, that's the other thing, is to keep in mind what the scale is. So if we're looking at Mother DeVille, it's just over $200,000. If you're looking at cost of a teacher, that's $100,000. So, but they're supposed to support all the other programs and needs of that school with that $200,000 in terms of supplies, services, repairs to equipment, all of those things. So it could have been, but I don't know if it would have had an impact. And that's what we expect our administrators to do, is to make that judgment on what will have the most impact on students when they're doing their expenditure plans. And if they will have a great impact by adding another EA, they have the ability to do that and address those needs. If they feel that one EA, when there's multiple areas, they may not feel that they'll be able to meet the expectations, and then look and say, can we fill it with through other ways, maybe with contracted services of some nature, help morning supports, maybe buying additional specialized materials or items of that nature to support students in a different way. It's all about juggling the priorities and saying what's going to get the biggest bang for our buck. When the budgets come in, that's when we evaluate and say that's in alignment with what you plan to do and what you're telling us you're doing. When we see the actuals is where we've got some concerns to say, okay, what's being withheld? Again, many years ago in a past life, I see the new principal just fearful of financial management, spend $2,000 an entire year for supplies and services in a 300 student school. You kind of go back and you guys say, okay, that's a little too far to one end. So again, it's getting everybody comfortable. you have the information that you need, you use the information, you make good decisions and not have the fear of, needing resources or just being comfortable with managing $200,000.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, trustee.
On the statement of the operations, it was noted and there was notes made about the 39% usage rate for the pre-K. And that issue was addressed, but then in the operations for the projection for year end, which is I think kind of almost the last sheet at the end of your report, with the projection and the correction that might be made for quarter 4 still brings us to 64.96%. So does the number, I guess, in the expense that we're not meeting kind of what we had budgeted for, is that due to enrollment or is that still an issue within the reporting process?
I would call it still an issue within the reporting process.
Okay, so even with everything that might be corrected, it would still be under.
I think once it's all corrected, I think we'll be.
We know that we have staffing in those pre-Ks
Yeah.
that exceeds that easily.
So
So
that's,
it's being coded to general instruction right now. It shouldn't be.
so that's kind of my question going, if this is a projection table, if the correction was projected properly, would we see 101%?
Yeah, it's an error that's been continued on through the projection. So the projection's based on the actuals that have been reported thus far, not for a corrected actual. Does that make sense?
It does, and if I can continue with that, 64%, if we're gonna end up at 100%, at the end of quarter 4, would that not bring our projected instruction down below 101 that's currently being projected?
That's right.
So my question is, in the projection, I guess moving forward, can we actually see those corrections being made in the projection?
Moving forward, yes.
So that I can see that with the corrections that have been noted, it should be 100% in quarter 4 and maybe 98% like as a projection, not a continuing. Okay.
The other thing to keep in mind with, especially on the instructional area, if schools are spending down surpluses, I know it doesn't look like it on the other chart. If they are spending down those surpluses and they were more higher than what they were in the springtime. So in the spring, we asked for a projection of how much money schools are carrying forward. Might be an estimate of $80,000, let's say. When we do our fiscal year end and we re-evaluate based on actuals, we might have $90,000. So the school utilizes that $90,000 to rework their budget. So their actual expenditures might utilize that additional $10,000. But their budget was only based on $80,000 of surplus. So they will show more expenditures than what they budgeted for, even though there's resources behind it. It's because we've done the budget in the springtime and we've adjusted it again for actuals in the fall.
Questions? Mr. Laka, having sales of services and products, does that include school generated funds?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, all school generated funds are incorporated and are not separated out from our financial statements.
Okay. They used to be, I haven't seen health year, so I was like,
Yeah.
hoping that.
It used to be a separate line, no
Yeah.
longer.
No, okay. Thank you. And again, like Mr. Laka stated, sometimes some of those school generated funds after being accumulated need to be spent on the students and the campuses. So then that parents are happy with us. Okay, we have a question.
I'm just curious about other revenues. What would the other revenues include?
Typically, the other revenues include rental income. So when a room was rented in outside of the school, like within the school, perhaps it's community use of the gymnasium. That's where that other revenue comes from. So again, I think we were a little bit conservative because we weren't sure if we were going to be able to have any of those activities happening in our schools. That has since changed.
So is it usually around this amount? Would you put the 29? Yeah, actually.
Off the top of my head, I couldn't comment. Yeah, it probably is.
Maybe it'd be a bit low still.
Yeah, it's hard to say because we're also looking at how we utilize our school facilities. And for example, in the city of Leduc, although we don't have a joint use agreement in place yet, the city of Leduc is honoring kind of an intent there for us to have for use of their facilities. And what they've expected and what we've put in place is a reciprocal. So their users that will be able to use municipal facilities for free to use our schools. So it's, everything's a bit in fluctuation. Again, not only due to COVID, but those community agreements may bring forward.
Thank you. So moving on, we'll go to number 6, committee reports. We start with finance. I'll call on Chair Trustee De La Sarwa. Are there any questions for us? See none, we'll move to labor. Trustee DeMarco. Any comments or questions to her? I see none. Go to ASB and I'll call on Trustee Tagu. Any question or comments?
I think everyone attended the spring general meeting, so we hope the rest of us, yeah, I did virtually. So I think we have a pretty good idea of what's happening.
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
So I realize this is from the May meeting, and in attending the June meeting, which I realize isn't on this report, but I just wanted to ask, one of the topics that was brought up was one of the other sister boards actually in Leduc brought up about community engagement, ways to have, and I know with our consultation that is one way, but is there other, historically, is there other things that our board has done to build community engagement? I know that was just a topic in the last ASBO meeting. I'm not sure if you had been on that at that point or.
I had to miss.
Okay.
That meeting. Marilyn was there.
But Marilyn was on there.
Yeah.
So like there wasn't a lot of
No.
suggestions in the meeting, but I just wanted to know historically what we have done to build community engagement within STAR. Or if there has been anything.
As far as community engagement, consultation.
Yeah.
that was the biggest. And then each of us in our own town have community engagements. So it's more local. I don't think in the common, there's a lot of different things that happen, probably the same thing up there, and so on. But you're not, and this.
Well, I would add, when we, pre-COVID, we had a Grace event in each community.
Right.
That was another thing.
And the other one that I can add on is as well as trustees, when community events are happening, right, that's where we're getting engaged with some of those partners around the state. I know the fall is coming and some communities have the harvest or fall, people here, that's those are all the engagements as trustees try and be involved. Okay. ASBA rural. Any question, comments for Trustee Jolene DeMarco? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I have 2. Sorry, I just scrolled back up to a different part. In regards to, I think it was the first section, social media, the last item or second last item, it states 40 boards at $500. What does this mean?
So they're creating that, so what they were doing is they're creating a new initiative to gain exposure for the Rural Caucus. And what that is isn't necessarily the cost of that initiative. That was because you were there as well as Charlie. So that was is if every board participates, that would be what the potential cost would be. But overall, in my notes, I think it was an overall annual cost of do you remember, $86?
Less than $100.
Yeah. So it's, yeah, well, I have a note here of an increase of $127.83. Does that sound right?
It could be. It was minimal.
It wasn't a significant increase. And then what it is allowing is it's allowing the divisions to highlight different programs that they have in their schools and in their divisions that could help promote the rural education.
So if I may comment on that, and I was there and I did question the timing and the hasteness of all of these, right? But if you think about it, rural education is becoming a challenge. A lot of our parents don't really know that much, simply because we don't expose and share some of the good initiatives and things that is being done. This is being promoted in line of some of the charter schools that is being established, for the lack of not knowing that most of these programming are existing within some of this rural education. So the Rural Caucus is looking at this initiative, one north, one south, look for students that are surveyed with media and social media, right? Have somebody support them, craft very good messaging. Each board highlights some of their most powerful programming and things, and then start sharing that over social media. So in all, it will cost the board about $500. Some of the students that will be hired will pay $16 or $17 just to support some of that. They will have some follow-up discussions and then bring that up to us. Because again, like I said, some of us question, we need, boards need to understand this, fully come on board and support it. So to my understanding, this is where all of this is coming from, to help promote the good work we already do. Yes. All right, what's your next question?
Thank you. In the last item under PUF and pre-K, I'm just wondering, how does this relate to Rural Caucus? What makes it different that this item is being discussed within Rural Caucus in regards to removing red tape, double assessments? These are provincial wide issues with these programs. So I'm just wondering what makes it hit the Rural Caucus agenda?
So this was an opportunity that we had to connect with other boards and have roundtable talks. So it's not necessarily in this regard a specific Rural Caucus concern. One of the concerns that is more, and I think it's with all of the topics, mental health and PUF, is the lack of qualified supports for those divisions in the rural area. So speech language is more, and I apologize for not stating that there, but we actually ran out of time during this talk. So that was kind of the only topics, but it's more of how can we advocate for supports for PUF, because there isn't necessarily the staff that can support those programs in rural schools.
And to add on to that, we all agree Edmonton doesn't need any more psychologists and psychiatrists than same with Edmonton, Calgary, right? But if you look at a place like Drayton Valley, there's no psychiatry over there, right? If you look at way up deep north, they have some of these. But then anytime we hear government-made initiatives, it's the rural communities that suffers with some of these professionals not being stationed or wanting to be in those areas. Right? Tomorrow, if you have $500, you get an appointment with a therapist, or whatever you want in Edmonton or Calgary, right? But if you go to Drayton Valley, or sometimes after Panuka, you have to go into. So we're talking about some specific of helping the rural communities establish some of these professionals, stay within, and then help these PUF students and pre-K students. Like I said, speech and language takes you 6 months. Guess what? Your kid is already developed away from that, is in that the correction will take more. So this is those discussions that happen around that. So rural caucus is dipping into some of this simply because these needs are within government. Oh, you have enough, no, within the rural communities we are still solving. Okay, perfect. We'll go to AS, we'll finish ACSTA. Any question, comments for Trustee Miller? Yeah, your own question.
Yeah.
I just actually have an addition that came in as information after I submitted the report,
Okay,
if that's okay.
yeah, go ahead.
So April 27th through the 30th is the SPICE conference for 2023. And May 2nd to 5th is the Blueprints conference of 2023.
Yeah.
And it will be held in the same location as last year. So I just wanted to add.
All right. Thank you.
I have one question. Just
Yeah, go ahead.
My question is about the bylaws. This seems like an enormous project. And are you on that committee?
I'm the chair of that committee.
Okay, so you are on it for sure then. What kind of the timeline? How are they looking at this? Is this going to be something over a year, probably at least?
So what we're actually looking at doing for this round of edits to bylaws is much more of a housekeeping, the alignment, fixing some wordings and some of the processes within the bylaws to clarify some things. There will be no structural changes. There will be no, I guess, foundational changes to the association within the bylaws. It's strictly just kind of more housekeeping level at this time. And we're looking at having the recommendations come to, the changes to the bylaws come to the boards this September, so that the boards can look it over before the AGM that happens in November. So maybe it'll come October. It'll come to the board, I guess, September. It'll come to boards across the province in October. It'll come to the AGM in November. From there, there will be a strategic plan put in, like with a time frame that will be put in place, and some of the previous and historic discussions that have happened in the past as in regards to restructuring. That plan and time frame will also kind of be put in place at the AGM. So that will move forward anywhere from 18 to 24 months out from the AGM this year.
So it's good.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So what I would like to ask is look at your calendars as soon as we come back in August for the AGM, right? So we can book rooms. They are open right now, but when we come back collectively, we will do that ASAP because we know come the fall things will be on the rush. Okay, please. All right. Unless Kim want it now. Go ahead. Kim, what do you want? For the registration. You want it now? Oh,
Sure.
yes,
Kim,
maybe, Kim.
We did, I think I asked you to book some rooms, right, for ACST. Did we already do that? Yeah, we already booked some rooms. We just need to know which one.
Okay, so. She's
But that
already
could be
done.
done in August. Absolutely.
Okay, absolutely, August, thank you.
They're booked for the ASBA too. The same hotel.
No, you're not at the same.
No.
Of course not.
Okay, so think about those two. Any other questions? All right, so that being said, let's take 10 minutes. 10 minutes recess and come back quickly so I can let's deal with one or two things.